development, and human rights. The UNGA aims to be a global forum where leaders discuss and seek solutions to pressing global challenges. There's usually an emphasis on the importance of multilateral dialogue for global progress. Now, one might still ask, why would the Prime Minister travel countless miles to spend less than 30 minutes at the UN podium? We take a moment now to reflect on what those few moments can do for us as a nation.
Prime Minister Kamla Persad-Bissessar will lead a Trinidad and Tobago delegation at the 80th session of the UN General Assembly in New York from September 22nd to 30th, with Minister of Foreign and CARICOM Affairs Sean Sobers as part of the advance team. The UN General Assembly is the main policy-making organ of the organization and provides a unique forum for member states to engage in multilateral discussion on a range of international issues covered by the Charter of the United Nations. The Trinidad and Tobago delegation will seek to strengthen diplomatic ties and foster collaboration through a series of high-level meetings with representatives from various countries and international organizations. Prime Minister Persad-Bissessar is also scheduled to address the General Assembly on Friday, September 26th.
Thank you, Mahalia Joseph Wharton. That was a great deal of information, culminating with the reminder that we are on standby for the PM's address at the UN General Assembly. Now, why do heads of state address the UNGA? We list 5 main reasons. The first purpose is national positioning. A leader articulates the nation's stance on crucial matters to define identity and vision. Secondly, agenda setting is crucial. Here, the head of state outlines priorities and initiatives to guide governmental actions. The third purpose focuses on moral leadership, where the leader inspires and unifies citizens, fostering national values and ideals. Next is signaling to markets and partners. The speech conveys economic stability and partnerships to encourage investment and collaboration. Finally, catalyzing multilateral support is key. A leader seeks cooperation on international issues, rallying allies to address crucial issues of major importance. So while we await our Prime Minister representing us on the world stage, influencing global policy and strengthening cooperation amidst critical world issues, it is important to note that Trinidad and Tobago has been represented since the beginning of the UNGA on September 22. An advanced delegation led by Foreign and CARICOM Affairs Minister Sean Sobers and Parliamentary Secretary in the Office of the Prime Minister and Minister in the Ministry of Foreign and CARICOM Affairs, Nicholas Morris, they were responsible for reinforcing country ties, meeting with Cuba's foreign minister to affirm solidarity. A separate strategic discussion with Poland's foreign minister centered on boosting bilateral trade and investment, alongside vital UN coordination on global security and development challenges. A significant diplomatic milestone was reached with the formal establishment of relations with the Principality of Monaco. The signed joint communique opens new avenues for cooperation in key sectors like sports, tourism, and the yachting industry. On the multilateral front, Minister Sobers strongly backed South-South cooperation and the advancement of the Sustainable Development Goals, or SDGs, at the G77 and a China annual meeting. He also joined his regional peers for a CARICOM Foreign Ministers Luncheon. Complementing these efforts, Parliamentary Secretary Nicholas Morris delivered an address at the high-level dialogue on dismantling transnational criminal activity. He underscored Trinidad and Tobago's firm commitment to combating organized crime and illicit arms trafficking through coordinated regional action. A powerful showing for Trinidad and Tobago on the international scene. We'll continue to track the delegation's progress even after the Prime Minister's address this evening. Interestingly enough, part of the discussions that began today in the Trusteeship Council chamber was a high-level meeting to commemorate and promote the International Day for the Total Elimination of Nuclear Weapons. But that begs the question, what will Prime Minister Kamla Persad-Bissessar actually focus on in her address to the United Nations General Assembly? You will have to wait with us. Tune into TTT Limited. But Sunilala recently spoke with a minister accompanying the Prime Minister, who may have given us a bit of an inside scoop.
It's a high-level mission with a packed agenda. Minister in the Office of the Prime Minister, Barry Padarat, says government is heading to the United Nations General Assembly with a clear focus. Speaking at 103.1 FM's Diwali Ka Amrit on Monday, he said climate change, economic development and global partnerships are high on the agenda.
Yes, it is a very packed agenda. The Honourable Prime Minister will speak and address the United Nations General Assembly on Friday. She is expected to address a number of topical issues ranging from the state of the economy in Trinidad and Tobago, some sustainable projects, but also climate change, the geopolitics that is playing out around the world, not only within our region, but the impact that that type of approach in terms of the geopolitics will play out.
Minister Padarat said government is also looking to expand its international reach, especially in regions like the Middle East.
There are other parts of the Middle East, in particular, United Arab Emirates, Qatar, etc., that we have not explored those opportunities for business growth and development of bringing investment into Trinidad and Tobago. So those are some of the areas that Mrs. Persad-Bissessar will identify in her bilateral discussions with those countries later in the week.
Sonolala, TTT News.
Thank you, Sunil. Last but not least, while we need to stay tuned in for the exact tenor and tone of the Prime Minister's address, we know that she is no stranger to this world stage, having previously represented us at the 68th General Assembly and at the 69th iteration, then having additional duties as chair of the Conference of Heads of Government of the Caribbean Community, or CARICOM.
We recognize the shortcomings of the MDG process and the need to embrace a new partnership involving governments, the private sector, civil society, and multilateral banks, amongst others, to advance action on sustainable development. As leaders, we agreed to an outcome document to chart, quote, the future we want. That is, a more sustainable future for the benefit of present and future generations. The future we want addresses many facets of what is required to stimulate sustainable development for all countries.
This, however, is the Prime Minister's first international trip since her re-election on April 28. This also shows the importance that she places on attending this event, as she made the time to congratulate our national award recipients on Republic Day, having put some measures in place with the advanced delegation. And we look at the future that we want, and we are waiting, because in the very near future, our Prime Minister Kamla Persad-Bissessar is going to make her address at the 80th iteration of the United Nations General Assembly. We have had representation from the Caribbean. The Caribbean was well represented thus far today at the UNGA through the Prime Ministers of St. Vincent and the Grenadines, Barbados, Jamaica, and Belize, who addressed the morning and afternoon session thus far of the general debate, which resumed at 9 a.m. this morning. Now, Trinidad and Tobago and Antigua and Barbuda, they're scheduled for the afternoon sessions. But going through some of the previous points before we have our Prime Minister on, the Prime Minister of St. Vincent and the Grenadines, Ralph Gonsalves, he described the world as increasingly dangerous, unequal, and unsettled due to big power rivalries, unilateralism, and a disregard for international law, while urging a return to mature multilateralism. He would have warned against imperial powers and rising hegemons, criticizing attempts at unilateral dominance, interference in small states' affairs, and the erosion of international norms. Prime Minister Gonsalves, he called for urgent global cooperation on climate change, nuclear threats, AI regulation, financing for development, and achieving the Sustainable Development Goals, highlighting proposals like the Bridgetown Initiative and CARICOM's leadership. He would have condemned the foreign interference in St. Vincent's upcoming elections, accusing external powers and non-state actors of undermining the country's democracy. He denounced genocide in Palestine, illegal Israeli actions in Gaza, the West Bank, and Qatar, while also urging for peace in Ukraine and calling for Taiwan's inclusion in UN agencies. He reiterated calls to end the U.S. embargo on Cuba and de-escalate tensions with Venezuela, urging the Caribbean and Latin America to remain a zone of peace. On Haiti, he expressed alarm at deepening instability and called for stronger, disinterested international support aligned with the Haitian people's aspirations. Now, in closing, he would have stressed the existential urgency of climate action, citing Hurricane Beryl's devastation, and that is about 1/3 of SVG's GDP lost. He demanded fair financing and solidarity for small island developing states. He declared small states like SVG to be free, independent, and resilient, capable of mighty deeds, and insisted their voices would not be silenced in global affairs. Now, we had the Bajan Prime Minister, Mia Amor Motley. Her statement, it spoke to a global crisis of truth, eroding trust in institutions, governance, and social order. She highlighted ongoing wars in Ukraine, Sudan, and Gaza, calling for peace, justice, and urgent humanitarian aid, including $66 million for Gaza and $200 million for Sudan to support children with food, water, and health needs. She stressed that lasting peace cannot come through violence, but through justice and dialogue. She urged for preservation of a rules-based international system, essential for small states' survival, and called for UN reform, including permanent Security Council seats for Africa and a rotating seat for SIDS. She identified pressing global threats, the climate crisis, food and water insecurity, refugee flows, inequality, and unregulated AI. She pointed to progress with new agreements, Pandemic Accord, the Seville Commitment on SDGs, AMR Action, the Beyond the Boundaries Oceans Treaty, and the Pact for the Future. She advocated a legally binding global framework on methane emissions to help curb temperature rise. She also called for adequate financing to support climate and development goals, citing underfunding of the Loss and Damage Fund. She reiterated support for Haiti, urged the end of the U.S. embargo on Cuba, and raised concern over military buildup in the Caribbean by the United States and Venezuela. She closed with a call for leaders to summon courage and unity inspired by resilience, even in the face of suffering, to forge a fairer and more just world. Jamaica's Andrew Holness reaffirmed its commitment to the UN Charter. This is Jamaican Prime Minister Andrew Holness, as the organization marks its 80th anniversary, while stressing the need for urgent reform to make the UN more democratic, representative, and responsive. He highlighted Jamaica's climate leadership, including a 2050 net zero pledge and a 50% renewable energy target by 2030, but warned that inadequate and unpredictable climate finance threatens the survival of small island developing states. He called for reform of the global financial system, noting Jamaica's debt reduction from 144% to 62% of GDP, but ongoing exclusion from concessional financing. He urged adoption of the multidimensional vulnerability index and innovative tools like debt for climate swaps. He reiterated opposition to the Cuba embargo, advocating dialogue and integration instead of isolation. On the Middle East, he condemned the October 7, 2023 attack on Israel, called for a ceasefire, hostage release, and renewed diplomacy to end the suffering in Palestine. Now, on Haiti, as CARICOM chair, Jamaica pressed for global support to restore peace, strengthen governance, and rebuild democratic institutions, warning that inaction would be catastrophic. He warned of transnational crime and gangs as existential threats, urging a global war on gangs with coordinated international action on arms control, intelligence sharing, and joint operations. Now, he closed by urging the Assembly to act decisively on climate, debt, poverty, conflict, and crime, stressing that small nations like Jamaica can achieve progress, but require a fairer global system. And letting you know, these are some of the Caribbean leaders that would have presented thus far today at the United Nations General Assembly. But also letting you know that in the afternoon session, But actually, we just, news coming to hand, we've had Lesotho, Cabo Verde, Bulgaria, Mali, and Andorra. We are getting ready for the United Nations, well, our Prime Minister, who is now going to present at UNGA.
I request protocol to escort Her Excellency and invite her to address the Assembly.
Thank you all very much. Thank you. Madam President, Excellencies, distinguished delegates, friends. It is an honor for me, on behalf of Trinidad and Tobago, to address this Assembly on the 60th anniversary of the United Nations. I congratulate you, Madam President, on your election, and I thank your predecessor for his service. Madam President, I'm very happy to see the escalator actually worked today. And I'm very happy to see the teleprompter is also working. So as I address you, thank you all very, very much. So I've had some blessings coming to the UN today. The UN has been much more than diplomacy. It is a lifeline to many countries, bringing education to classrooms, care to clinics, recovery to villages, and growth to fragile economies. On this milestone anniversary, we must face a very hard truth. The spirit of multilateralism is under strain, the effects of which has begun to undermine the foundations of stability and peace. Trinidad and Tobago confronts conflicts that seriously threaten our stability and peace. The notion that the Caribbean is a zone of peace has become a false ideal. The reality is stark. No such peace exists today. For too many in our region, peace is not daily life, but an elusive promise, glimpsed and never grasped. In its absence, our citizens pay a terrible toll. In 2024, for example, Trinidad and Tobago, a tiny nation in the Caribbean of 1.4 million persons, we recorded 623 murders in 1 year last year. 41%, 100,000. That's about 40%, and many of them are gang-related. So the reality is, being a zone of peace is still an elusive dream that we're pursuing. In the last 25 years, we have had over 10,000 murders, which is equivalent to losing 1% of our adult population. Across Latin America and the Caribbean, homicides range from 20 to more than 60 per 100,000. President Trump's comments on the effects on countries of relentless narco and human trafficking, about organized crime, illegal immigration are correct. Countries are not only defined by geographical borders, but also by cultural identities, religious beliefs, ethnic compositions, and, of course, legal structures. That is why, through legal immigration, persons are allowed entry because they fulfill the criteria to integrate into the existing population and to add value to their own lives as well as their adopted society at large. However, illegal immigration neglects all checks and balances and will only create long-term disorder, as most illegal immigrants will not be able to assimilate into their adopted societies. That inevitably leads to greater poverty, crime, and cultural antagonism. This, then, is not phobia, It is not hyperbole. It is simply the stark, naked truth. Small countries like mine, Trinidad and Tobago, suffers from illegal immigration. Because of the recent increased protections at the U.S. southern border, illegal migration of drug cartels and criminal gangs have been rerouted in the Eastern Caribbean, which is where my country is located. It is driving increasing gang violence, drug arms, and human trafficking. Efforts to repatriate illegal immigrants from Trinidad and Tobago from recent times has proven very difficult. Criminal syndicates are abusing asylum requests for refugee status. Therefore, Trinidad and Tobago is particularly grateful for the U.S. military presence in the Southern Caribbean. This has been very effective in inhibiting the innumerable activities of drug cartels within our country. While there have been objections to the U.S. military action against drug cartels in the Southern Caribbean, some objections from some countries, I state today Trinidad and Tobago reminds the international community that unless forceful and aggressive actions are taken, these evil drug cartels will continue their societal destruction because they believe affected nations will always unreservedly subscribe to morals and ethics and human rights and values, which they themselves blatantly flout. They do not adhere to those, and therefore we will fight fire with fire within the law. That is why we willingly supported the International Security Alliance announced by U.S. Secretary of State Marco Rubio, involving the U.S. and several countries in South America, and of course including Trinidad and Tobago, to combat drug trafficking in the hemisphere. Trinidad and Tobago, I say, is very committed to contributing our resources, as scarce as they may be, and our capabilities to this alliance, in line with the theme of this year's General Assembly, Better Together. The United Nations Office on Drugs and Crime, in its 2025 World Report, makes a very true, unmistakable fact very clear. The global drug economy destabilizes institutions, corrodes democracy, undermines development. That is a war without borders, measured in murdered children, measured in broken families, and measured in stolen futures. The cartels and the governments that enable them are taking us for fools. If left unchecked, gangs could replace governments, and states may stand in name only, but collapse in substance. Nowhere is this warning more explicit than in Haiti, our CARICOM neighbor, where armed gangs, political collapse, food insecurity have converged to overwhelm democracy and to create a protracted emergency. Today, Trinidad and Tobago wants to commend Kenya for leading the multinational security support mission in Haiti. Trinidad and Tobago also endorses the comments made by U.S. Ambassador Dorothy Shea on August 28, 2025, when she noted, and I quote, "The next international force must be resourced to hold territory, secure infrastructure, and complement the Haitian National Police in a parallel comprehensive approach which includes disrupting gang financing, arms trafficking, and other illicit flows, fueling instability. All is required to restore order. All is required to restore order in Haiti." As member states, consider the form of greatest support as we urge the international community to support us, to support the United States, to support Panama's proposed gang suppression force to allow the deployment of 5,500 member force to subdue the gangs and restore order in Haiti. The theme before us, as I said before, and we all know for today, better together. We go from principle to practice. This principle, better together, is not just a slogan, it is a call to action. It signifies the collective effort required to combat transnational crime, to uphold democracy, and to restore peace and security in our nations. Therefore, despite being a very small country with limited resources, we are committed to sharing the burden with the United States, with Panama, and all countries willing in assisting the gang suppression force to bring some semblance of peace to Haiti. I turn now to the climate agenda. This week, the climate agenda has been at the forefront of many speeches. I say with the greatest of respect, the antagonistic approach adopted by some climate activists towards the implementation of their climate agenda sometimes does more harm than good. Developed countries, I say with the greatest respect again, can't or should not force-feed a climate agenda onto developing countries and blackmail them into cooperation. We cannot proceed in that manner. That is exactly what has been happening, where the access to financial systems, media platforms, new technologies and development funding has been weaponized in order to coerce, to force compliance with some climate goals. What adds insult to injury and to injustice is that many of the same developed nations actively supporting the imposition of aggressive climate agenda, an aggressive climate agenda, actually achieve developed nation status and prosperity through highly environmentally destructive and polluted industries in the many decades gone by. While there is definitely a space for renewable energy, the fact remains that fossil fuels are still essential for our continued survival. It cannot be ignored that the thousands of products created from fossil fuels, essential for daily life, cannot be produced economically in the quantities required from other means to satisfy the current world population. Trinidad and Tobago commits that we will, within reason, support actions to protect the environment for future generations. However, independent nations must be free to create a climate policy which is crafted to balance their development goals and poverty eradication with policies dealing with environmental protection. In my respectful view, this balance is a pragmatic necessity for food security, for civil order, and for economic growth. As we progress, Madam President, into a multipolar world order, where power is diffused across regions, it will be impossible to coerce all actors to adhere to the current climate agenda being advocated. Trinidad and Tobago will not adopt unbalanced and unreasonable imposed climate practices that will simply lead to the exploitation of our jobs, lowering our standard of living, and stunting our economic development, punishing our people into poverty, while many larger countries completely ignore their responsibilities. Our country, Trinidad and Tobago, the United Nations, we have always been unwavering in supporting through the various crises and empowering our citizens through UNICEF, through UNDP, through ILO, through UNESCO, and UN Women, and we want to thank the United Nations for those initiatives. In return, we have sought to repay that trust by advancing the proposal for the International Criminal Court in 1989, by introducing Resolution 6569 on women and disarmament, and we also signed up very early the Non-Proliferation Arms Control in 2010, and we signed the Arms Trade Treaty early in 2013. In my own country, regarding that the children are our future, knowing full well that their survival, their resilience, and their sustainability will continue our nations forward, as in all nations. And so we created a Children's Authority. We created a Children's Life Fund. We expanded early childhood education. We ensured a trailblazing adherence to the MDGs, especially when it comes to education, proving that even the smallest nations can align domestic products with global ambition. As we now mark the 30th anniversary of the Beijing Declaration, we reaffirm that women and girls must be equal partners in peace and sustainability. Just as we call for in our 2010 resolution, we continue to champion their empowerment, knowing it is essential to global progress. Our commitment to the United Nations is clear, and our voice is steady. For 63 years, we have upheld the rule of law, championed human rights, strengthened international law, and we have never been silent in the face of injustice. And this is why Trinidad and Tobago sought support to become a non-permanent member of the United Nations Security Council for the 2027-28 term. We are happy that there was a non-objection to that, and we willingly take on the mantle on that United Nations Security Council for the coming year. So, my friends, all colleagues, we say, Madam President, during our term, we will build on our record, amplifying unheard voices to ensure that justice and equality anchor lasting security. Madam President, colleagues, Trinidad and Tobago may be small in size, but we are large in conviction. We continue to ask for your support so that this Council reflects not only the interests of the powerful, but also the voices and aspirations of all people. Trinidad and Tobago is firmly committed to the tenets of multilateralism. I want to take a moment to especially thank Saudi Arabia, the United Arab Emirates, Qatar, Turkey, Kuwait, Bahrain, Ghana, and all others who have been actively working with us to increase cultural and economic cooperation. The United States, Canada, the United Kingdom, India, China, and the European Union remain always reliable partners, as they have been for decades. On this 63rd anniversary, let us agree to strive for greater cooperation, to strive for more openness to respecting free speech, and also at the same time respecting dissenting opinions. Over the past decade, there has been an inclination to cancel views that are not fashionable to dominating narratives. Today I ask, let us pledge to listen to each other with an objective mindset. Peace and progress can only be fulfilled through honest, sometimes uncomfortable decisions, and this is the place for that. This honest communication is even more important, as I said, in a multipolar world order, where military and economic power is now disseminated across the globe. Madam President, Trinidad and Tobago commits to the work of this body, not for conquest, not for power, but the sake of all humanity. I thank you very much, Madam President.
En nombre de la Asamblea.
On behalf of the Assembly, I thank the Prime Minister of the Republic of Trinidad and Tobago.
So we just had the Prime Minister, Kamla Persad-Bissessar, delivering an address at the United Nations General Assembly. She started off with a bit of wit, while swiftly pivoting to say that multilateralism is under threat as peace remains elusive. She spoke of the matter of climate change. The PM called for a meeting of the minds with a softening of approach by people who are diametrically opposed to each other. There are other issues that were raised and addressed, and we will bring you the information in subsequent newscasts. But on behalf of all of us here at TTT Limited, I'm DK Rostar. Thank you for tuning in.
This is TTT. Live for local.